So I've always been fascinated by people. What I'm about to say, and really this entire presentation is going to really support Bass's accusations that I have autism. But I've always hyper fixated on people and held certain people to a really high, almost role model standard. Um, and I think everybody does this. Everybody, I'm sure you can think about your person or your people, whether it's an athlete, musician, you name it. Everybody seems to have their group of celebrities or role models, or as I call them, exemplars. And when thinking about my project and who, like one person I could use to discuss this idea on would be, I realized that all of my people have in common that they're creators. And the thing that really fascinates me about people and creative people is how they create and their process. I don't like that right there. So when assessing my group, one guy kind of stood out above everybody else as kind of the chief creative, and that's a guy named David Lynch. So I call David Lynch a professional weirdo. I'm just going to put these down here. So I was first introduced to him by a camp counselor who I don't think even knew who David Lynch was, but he loved the 1984 version of Dune, which is an awful movie. And so about 4 years, or I think then I went home and I Googled this Dune movie and I found this guy and I'm like, this guy's weird. And then 4 years later, thanks to the internet, kind of fell in love with his work and philosophy. He's a surrealist artist, kind of a pioneer of American surreal film. And surrealism is a style that tries to challenge reality by depicting a warped, irrational universe. But it also communicates a sense of reality by doing so. I educated myself in pretty much everything Lynch. I've watched all of his movies. I've watched probably 4 or 5 documentaries. I've read 2 of his books. And after doing all that, I firmly believe that he encapsulates what it means to be a creative exemplar. So now we've got some questions to answer. What is creative philosophy? So simply put, it's just the way in which an artist creates. It's kind of their method. What is a creative exemplar? So philosopher Linda Zagrebski defines exemplars as those persons whom we see on close observation and with reflection to be admirable in all or most of their acquired traits. So when applied to the philosophical field of creativity, it's an artist whose work or process is worthy of admiration and emulation. And then how is David Lynch a creative exemplar? That's what I'm going to try to do, show you. So I didn't want to just talk about this guy and be like, he's a normal movie maker. He's not at all. This is a scene from a movie that I'll talk about later on. Can you get, the volume's there? Okay. The volume's the most important part. So that's his kind of thing. So that's from a movie called Eraserhead. So Eraserhead is Lynch's first film, and it kind of follows the story of a man named Henry who lives in a bizarre industrial wasteland. And he deals with the newfound tedium of the lizard-like creature that is supposedly his son. It's commonly interpreted as kind of just an extended nightmare sequence dealing with the fears of parenthood. So this movie, there's a dictionary term, or I don't know if it's in the official Oxford Dictionary. I think it is, but Lynchian. It's just Lynch. And my favorite definition, I'm going to be using a lot of quotes from David Foster Wallace, because he wrote an essay about David Lynch. But his definition of Lynchian is an academic definition of Lynchian might be that the term refers to a particular kind of irony, where the very macabre and the very mundane combine in such a way as to reveal the former's perpetual containment within the latter. But like postmodern or pornographic, Lynchian is one of those Potter Stewart type words that's definable only ostensibly, i.e., we know it when we see it. Ted Bundy wasn't particularly Lynchian, but good old Jeffrey Dahmer, with his victims' various anatomies neatly separated and stored in his fridge alongside his chocolate milk and shed spread, was thoroughly Lynchian. So, yeah, that's Eraserhead. I think it's the Lynch film. It kind of just shows you everything you need to know about how weird this guy is and what he's trying to do through everything. Oh, no. So this is, I think, his fourth film, Blue Velvet. Switch cards. So this movie introduces really, I would say it's the theme of Lynch's career. It's definitely his most popular theme, which David Foster Wallace calls the seamy underside structure. He defines the seamy underside structure as the idea that dark forces roil and passions seethe beneath the green lawns and PTA potlucks of any town USA. So it's kind of this idea that Lynch likes to show this perfect surface. Like the opening scene of this movie is this, it's like 50s, like, I don't know what music is kind of playing, but almost like Elvis type music. There's a fire truck going by, everybody's waving, and it shows this white picket fence with this bed of roses right in front of it. And then we pan to this guy and he has a stroke and falls over, and it just pans down and beneath the grass and there's these beetles fighting. And it's kind of this symbol that serves as a synecdoche for almost the entire career of Lynch. That's just like this perfect surface, and then he likes to show you all the evil kind of lurking beneath it. So this thing kind of serves to do this. It shows that you can't, through the film, he does this whole thing. This is just the movie. He shows you this perfect town and then everything awful going on underneath. And there's this horrible evil, and then finally at the end he shows an image that concludes it that's a bird with a beetle in its mouth. So it's kind of signifying that this evil has been conquered. And so many people like to look at these movies that he makes and say, this is horrible, disgusting, just sadistic. Why would you want to watch this? And it's like the idea that you have to, in order to understand how good the good really is or appreciate it, you have to see the bad. And I think that's an inherently Christian theme. I don't think Lynch really thinks so. But a really interesting thing that he does through this movie, David Foster Wallace pointed out perfectly. He said, Lynch carefully sets up his film, both so that we find some parts of the sadism and degeneracy Jeffrey, the main character, witnesses compelling and somehow erotic. It's little wonder that I find Lynch's movies sick. Nothing sickens me like seeing on screen some of the very parts of myself I've gone to the movies to try to forget about. Just another word on the themes, and then he also made a TV show called Twin Peaks that I think is really important to his career. I kind of wanted to really... So I've got this idea that Lynch's career is unknowingly Christian. There's a lot of themes that he has that I think can be related to Christian ideas, but he just doesn't do that. And I'll talk about that whole thing later on. But, and like even the seamy underside thing, I think that you could relate that to something as simple as the story of Job. It's this guy that went to hell and back, essentially, just was tortured, and then by God. So, and then at the end, he really appreciates, like, he gets to grow old and all this thing, and he really appreciates that there's this goodness and this beauty in his life that he had an understanding of before, but it wasn't complete. So, kind of the beautiful thing about Twin Peaks, it deals with the desensitization of violence in modern media. So, David Lynch had this big beef with television. He said that the worst thing about this modern world is that people think you get killed on television with zero pain and zero blood. It must enter into kids' heads that it is not very messy to kill somebody, and it doesn't hurt that much. It's a real sickness to me. So he made Twin Peaks, a TV show to talk about how awful TV is. So it's using the medium against itself, which I think is beautiful. And how he does this, it's the story of this teenager prom queen, greatest girl in the high school, whatever, like the ideal high school student, gets murdered. And it's the impact that this murder has on the small town that's just profound, and it lasts throughout the entirety of the show. It's the central tree of the show, and everything branches off of this trauma from this incident. Um, so, another David Foster Wallace quote. uh, David Foster Wallace said, "Lynch knows that an act of violence in American film has, through repetition and desensitization, lost the ability to refer to anything but itself. This is why violence in Lynch's films, grotesque and coldly stylized and symbolically heavy as it may be, is qualitatively different from Hollywood or even anti-Hollywood's hip cartoon violence. Lynch's violence always tries to mean something. His films are latent with violence. He doesn't refrain from showing evil, but every single act of violence that he shows in these films seems to, or whatever, anything he does, seems to make an impact on the viewer and show the horror of that evil. He doesn't stray away from showing evil. He wants you to see this exists and there's a solution, essentially." So that's the conclusion of the work section, done talking about the things he's made. So now I'm going to talk about his creative philosophy, or the way he makes the things he's made. So David Lynch said ideas are everything, and he likes to call ideas fish. So he wrote a book called Catching the Big Fish, which is talking about how to find ideas. He believes that there's this ocean of pure consciousness, kind of the base of everything. He said that everything that is a theme, or everything that is a thing, emerges from this field. So he talks about how are you going to catch fish. He doesn't think that ideas are something that just spawns out of a person's head. It comes from this unified field, this ocean of pure consciousness. And the person is merely a vessel for this idea. They get to catch the idea. So he talks about you have to be fishing in the right place. You can't go fish in the desert. So it's kind of like, if I'm trying to get an idea, I'm not going to go in like an amusement park. I'd probably go in like my room or a library. Like there's a certain place where you can catch a fish. You can use, so smaller fish or smaller ideas, they're kind of easy to catch. You can get them pretty easily. But a bigger fish, you really have to dig deep and fish really deep and just lock in kind of to get the bigger fish. And you can use these smaller ideas to piece together like a puzzle to get these bigger ideas as bait, kind of. And it takes time, but the payoff of it is wonderful. And he says that the way in which we catch ideas is through our intuition, which he believes is the greatest gift that humans have. And he calls it feel thinking your way through, which I think is neat. But my favorite thing about what David Lynch says about ideas is that this theme of the person catching the idea that doesn't make it. It comes from somewhere else. And he uses an analogy of a chef. He says the chef cooks the fish, the chef doesn't make the fish. He simply prepares it. That's what we're doing when we get ideas. We get this idea from somewhere, and we're the vessel. We get to give it to everybody else. And the way in which Lynch does this, since it's from this unified field, is kind of unsatisfying. But so my favorite example of this, I mean, I've heard so many artists, not enough artists, talk about this whole thing where they don't make the idea. They're not responsible for the idea that or the art that they give. But Bob Dylan said in an interview, in I think the early 2000s, late 90s, an interviewer asked him if he could write songs, or if he could write songs the way he did in the 60s. And he said, no, I don't know how I got to write those songs. He didn't say, I don't know how I wrote those songs. He said, I got to write those songs. So it's this idea. The artists do not create the art they are responsible for, but you got to be a vessel for that art. And Dylan does it, and he backs it with God in a much more satisfying way from the Christian perspective, and Lynch does not. And I think that kind of points out another hole in this big puzzle of David Lynch. So this thing's stupid. So Lynch is a big fan of transcendental meditation. And when I first like got into reading about Lynch or whatever. I was like, this is just some goofy little hobby that he's got. He likes to just sit in the room by himself and think about nothing. But turns out it's pretty much his religion. Um, there's this guy named Maharishi Mahesh Yogi who founded this movement, I think in like the 50s or 60s. Like the Beatles were doing this. And the idea of it is that you expand your consciousness and broaden your world understanding to gain consciousness. So it's transcending by clearing the mind. So I don't like the use of the word meditation here, because if you're clearing your mind, that is a misuse of the word meditation. It's, to me, I've done a lot of research because I kind of wanted to think it was cool, but I think it can be helpful. I think that like it's like yoga, like it can be, I don't know, peaceful. But I think it's a temporary band-aid like fix to a much deeper wound that can be healed by a different type of meditation. So it turns out I was right at first. It is pretty goofy. But so why have an exemplar? So now that I've kind of summed up this dude to the best of my abilities with time willing, why? So first of all, nobody can accomplish anything by themselves. If I'd never seen a movie, I would not be able to make a good movie. Simple as that. What did I write right there? So, geez. Oh yeah. Okay. So, because of that, it's of the utmost importance that somebody has a creative exemplar or an exemplar of any sort, or a role model, whatever you want to call it. So I think that the key thing to do when you're finding your exemplar is to find a person that's worthy of your attention. Your attention and your creativity are far too important to be wasted on unworthy exemplars and unworthy people. I think that your attention, your creativity, your intuition, all those things, those are the most important things you have, and too many people waste those on just idiots. So the other key thing is don't idolize people. Too many people find their person, like LeBron or Kanye. Kanye is a really good example. Too many people liked Kanye's music, and then he started saying all this wild stuff, and they just agreed with it because they liked Kanye. So many people just have this person, and they just obsess over them, and they listen to every single thing that they say. And you can't do that. You still have to be skeptical and never blindly accept anything that a person has to say. So, final thing. I'm way over time. Sorry. I have this whole thing called the missing piece. This is where I get kind of personal with it. So Lynch has this quote about the writing of Eraserhead. He said, "I didn't know the thing that just pulled it all together, and it was a struggle. So I got out my Bible and I started reading, and one day I read a sentence, and I closed the Bible because that was it. That was it. And then I saw the thing as a whole, and it fulfilled this vision for me 100%. I don't think I'll ever say what that sentence was." So this kind of happened for me because throughout doing this project, I got to a point where I really just hated the guy. I was like, everything he says has a grain of truth surrounded by a lie. And it just felt stupid to me. I got to the point where it's like, I found this exemplar and it was a mistake. So I was going to change my project, whatever. And there was this important weekend in my life. And on Monday, I think February 19th, I was sitting working on this project and just reading over all these things about meditation and ideas and this see me understride, this you have to understand the bad to know the good, all these themes. And I'm like, there's just this missing piece in the center of it all. It would come together, but it can't. And it felt like a finger just kind of pushed it in. And I was like, oh, it's God. And so before that moment, I wouldn't have called myself a Christian. And that was some divine intervention of some sort. And obviously there's a lot leading up to that. But that was kind of the moment for me that was like, okay, I believe in all this. So I think that missing piece of God completes and beautifies the puzzle that is David Lynch. When you apply God to the themes, it gives meaning to and reasoning for this value of goodness that Lynch has. Instead of an undefinable field from which ideas just spawn, you have a gracious Father supplying ideas to you. Transcendental meditation goes from this just devoid, thoughtless exercise to a meditation where you fill your mind with wisdom and get a beautiful personal relationship. When you apply this piece to Lynch, it makes his set of ideas profoundly important and applicable in everybody's day-to-day life. And I think that you can do this with so many more people. This is just somebody that did it for me. So never expected I'd be here from this project, but thanks David Lynch for making me a Christian, I guess.
Gentlemen, you got anything for Bush? We've got a few minutes.
No human being has ever said that.
No.
Should our exemplar just be Jesus? Is that...
Yeah. I think you can have more, like multiple, but yeah. Yeah.
Well, and so like to that point, you mentioned it was cool how you balanced like, yes, we should all find someone worth following, and Lord knows there's a lot of, in our age of influencers, there are people vying for our attention and trying to get us to literally follow in some cases, but also nobody's worth idolizing. Translate that a little bit. No one's worth turning into a god.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, they are God, in which case Jesus is both worth following because he is the God that we're talking about.
Yep.
Well done, Bush.
Thanks, man.
I just want, if you've seen WandaVision, so if you watched the Marvel series WandaVision, I think it's the first episode.
Yep.
When he brings the boss to dinner, and they have this like horrifying dinner scene. Like that's very much an homage to this Lynch scene from Eraserhead, which I saw for the first time in high school with somebody who had seen it before, and we were all watching it. There's like 15 of us watching it, and this is all happening. We were like, Charlie, what's going on? He was like, I don't know. And we were like, you've seen the movie before. He goes, David Lynch doesn't know what's going on. Like, nobody understands this. I texted Bush after Henry was born and said, I understand Eraserhead. Like, I've got it. Because it's all about the fear of fatherhood. Did Bob Dylan sell his soul to Satan?
There's a good chance.
There's a video of him saying, like,
Yeah,
something kind of
I've
weird.
seen it, yeah.
So do the ideas come from the unmediated sphere of consciousness, or God, or Satan?
Well, what would I say, or what would David Lynch say?
You don't care.
Okay, then God. But I think it's a gift that we get from God instead of it being just a byproduct of consciousness. He kind of makes ideas seem like just these things, and you assemble them, and he's got this. The whole thing with David Lynch is these ideas don't fit together at all. They don't make sense. These movies don't make sense, but they feel right. That's the whole intuition thing. He just gets these ideas that he kind of feels like they go together somehow, and he puts them together, and it makes a movie, and the movie doesn't make sense, but it's kind of beautiful. And every time, you can attest to this, every time you watch a David Lynch movie, you get done, and this is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life.
What I just watched, but it is the best movie I've ever seen.
Yep.
You said he wants you to see the evil and that there's a solution or something like that. What is the solution?
So I don't know what he would probably say transcendental meditation or
I'm
something
arguing it's
stupid.
The movie itself.
I think it is.
The filmic experience of like seeing the movie.
I think it's that awareness that David Foster Wallace talked about that's like, oh, that's me.
Yeah.
And it's almost an epiphany moment where I'm as awful as these things that I've seen.
Yeah.
Let's do something about it.
Picture what you're
Yeah. And he was raised Presbyterian, and you can kind of see that.
Yeah.
But he now claims that he isn't religious. But yeah.
So a couple things real quick. One, I wonder if that, like his whole thing about ideas and them coming from somewhere. As we were talking about it, it's like I don't like that all that much because I like the idea of creativity being something that's spontaneous in us, something like truly original. Seems like that's what makes creativity creativity. But the chef thing helps because a chef doesn't, none of those ingredients originate with the chef, but the assembly of them does, you know, and so forgive us if y'all are just kind of like observing as we philosophize here, but I wonder if there's not something interestingly analogous when God tells Adam to name the animals. Adam didn't create any of those animals, but he gets this participation in the creative act by saying, like, contributing to it. You know, it's like God didn't, or David Lynch didn't make roses, or presumably picket fences for that matter, but he puts them together. And I think this is a cool thing that a filmmaker does, like someone who actually contributes to making a film. You know, we're all lost. You mentioned Dune. Yeah, everybody's appreciating what's the dude's name?
Villeneuve.
Yeah, that guy. He just made Dune. He took it from this weird 80s movie that nobody really cared too much for. It made it this big, beautiful cinematic thing. It's like he didn't even write the story. He just remade it in a way that all of us could appreciate. So I think I'm getting kind of on board with that.
Yeah, I think it's God gives us the ingredients and we make the dish.
And you gotta think God's sitting back thinking, what? Watch what he's about to do.
He's about to cook. Yeah.
So let me project on all of us. Hey, I told y'all a while ago, I'm convinced that every single one of y'all have been given ingredients. I call them bread and fish, and that's my whole thing. But call them whatever you want to call them. God gave you a little bit of stuff, and he's kind of just sitting back saying, watch what they're going to do with that. This is going to be good. And all our job is to look at ourselves, examine ourselves, and ask, like, what did God give me that I can contribute to the world? That I can do to make his creation better? These animals are going out here unnamed. I'm going to go name myself an animal. However you want to picture it, this just happens to be the weird way in which Bush is processing it. But however you want to process it, like this is what calling is. This is what telos. This is what purpose, divine purpose is all about. Another thing I got to throw in there, my personal exemplar, C.S. Lewis was brought to Christ in a very similar way because he saw pagan mythologists, pagan poets of ancient times that knew nothing of the God of the Bible, and yet God was speaking truth through the pagans. He just saw that in Scripture, God was speaking truth through himself. And that's a really significant difference. One more round of applause.